Hello, and welcome to another episode of Beastly Talks. As always, I'm your host, Ian Helling, and today it is just me sitting in a room. Winter has finally arrived. It is freezing fucking cold, and honestly, I don't mind it. Gives me a little taste of home, the cold northern lands, the land of trolls, which I am actually returning to in 4 weeks' time. And so I'm working my ass off at the moment trying to record as many podcasts as possible so that I can keep the podcast going, even when I'm out of the country. So we've got some really cool guests lined up that I've already recorded with. We have another couple of guests that I am going to be recording with, and lots of stuff happening. Things are busy. Things are chaotic, but I am very much enjoying it. All right, so before we get stuck into the topic, I'm just going to remind everyone that we've got something awesome happening at the end of July. We have the illustrious Ben Gertz from Kaizen K9 over in Perth coming here to run a 2-day reactivity workshop. Ben, if you're listening to this, remember I called you illustrious. I think that is a big compliment. I don't know. I haven't actually looked up what it means, but I think it means something really cool. Ben is coming on the 25th and the 26th of July, and the workshop will be run here in Melbourne in Bundoora. Tickets are up for sale now. Jump on to beautifulbeasts.com.au/events, and you can grab your ticket from there. If you know someone who has a reactive dog, that would be a good candidate to actually to have a working spot, then get in touch with me. We're still looking for some more working spots, but yeah, absolutely keep that in mind. It's going to be a fantastic weekend. And like I've said before, whether you're a trainer who already works with reactive dogs, whether you're a dog training student or just someone who has a reactive dog, definitely not one you're going to want to miss out on. So get signed up for that immediately. Aside from that, podcast, yeah, cool. All right, I think I'm on top of everything. All right, so let's get stuck into it. We've got a really interesting topic to talk about today. And I am going to have to preface this by saying that to everyone listening, this is very much bro science. I can't explain in any other way. I would love to get someone on the podcast that can actually talk about the brain and what happens in the brain when certain things happen to us, because I'd love to know more about that. But when I'm talking about bro science, and I think I don't know who came up with the word bro science, but essentially what that means to me, it means I've seen it with my own eyes. I've seen it happen so many times. I've done it. I've been a part of it so many times, and it works. I just don't know how to explain exactly what is happening in the dog's brain and why it works. So I have actually been looking around to see if there are any like neuroscientists here in Melbourne that we could maybe, get on the show. Or it doesn't have to be here in Melbourne, but in Australia, but even overseas. If anyone can think of anyone, I feel free to send me a message because I'd love to know more about this. But bro science to me means I have seen it work. I do it over and over. It's a repeatable pattern in training and behavior modification that I see all the time, but I don't actually know what's happening in the dog's brain. So if there are some gaps in the actual knowledge, that's because I don't have the knowledge, but I would love to find out more about it. But topic for today is how punishment opens the door to reinforcement. Now, a lot of people are going to listen to that and they're probably going to get really upset, which is cool. That's what I do. I upset people. Don't know why. I like to think of myself as a nice guy. But I guess I have strong opinions, and a lot of people don't like that. But so I want to get stuck into like if you have a dog that is a particularly anxious dog, or maybe even a frantic dog, in the terms of a dog that gets trapped in a heightened state of arousal or especially prey drive. A dog that cannot get out of its own head and actually start thinking about what's happening around it. And I want to talk about how utilizing heavy bouts of pressure and even punishment in that situation actually leads the dog into a completely different state of mind where we can actually start working with reinforcement again. And it sounds very counterintuitive, but hopefully, I think I have some good examples here that most people can relate to, and we can maybe start making a little bit more sense of all of this. Now, I want to start off by talking about what I call the mindset trap. And the mindset trap is very often linked to high states of arousal in dogs, high states of prey drive, but also high levels of anxiety. And so, dogs with low tolerance for stress, whether that is towards a trigger that triggers prey chasing, or whether it's towards a trigger that makes the dog fearful and uncomfortable and anxious, what happens with the mindset trap is the dog very much gets stuck inside of its own head. So, in high states of arousal or higher states of anxiety, the only thing you can think about is how anxious or aroused you are. And so, this becomes this like eternal feedback loop that the dog is incapable of snapping out of. And I think this relates to people as well. Like, if you've been particularly stressed or anxious about something, the only thing that you can think of or think about is how anxious you are. And the more you think about how anxious you are, the more fucking anxious you get. So the more anxious you get, the more you get stuck in, holy shit, I'm so anxious, which increases your anxiety further. And this eternal feedback loop is just hijacking your entire brain. And that is what we see a lot of, especially when we're working with reactive dogs, this eternal feedback loop that the dog just cannot snap out of. Now, I also find this happens a lot with dogs that are very highly aroused or highly prey driven. So I actually got contacted by someone yesterday who said, they have a staffy. Staffy has actually like seemingly good obedience, is quite friendly with people, quite friendly with dogs. However, swallows, a bird that we have a fucking lot of down here, they trigger dogs in such an intense way. And I think it's because of their kind of super fast flight and maneuverability. They kind of spin in circles and they flip back and forth. And it's almost like the dog can't lock onto them properly. And so they become absolutely frantic around them, like way worse than many other birds that I've ever seen. Now, there are some dogs that are just intense bird chasers in general, but I find even dogs who have in the past shown no interest in birds will still get hung up in swallows. And and that's one of their big issues. If there's a swallow around, dog's gone. That dog ain't coming back, right? And this is a very common problem. But so we have anxiety on the one end where you kind of uncomfortable in the situation that you're in, and you think about how uncomfortable you are, and that exacerbates the problem. But again, this also goes for a lot of arousal type things where, say, you have a German Shepherd that loves playing tug, and they become so frantic around the toy that there is no productive input happening in the dog's brain. They're not listening to commands. They're not able to out the toy. All of these things that are very common problems in a lot of the higher drive dogs. But again, this mindset trap that I keep talking about is the dog getting stuck in this eternal loop in their head where they're just looping around. I like this so much, or I'm so worried about this that the only thing I can think of is how much I like this or how worried I am about it. And boom, boom, boom. the dog hits a point where they turn frantic. And in the case of a dog that gets over aroused in play, for example, they can begin resource guarding toys. They can redirect onto you if you try to take the toy away, or they can even start showing aggression if you try to stop the game. Now, in the more anxious kind of fearful dogs, obviously that tends to lead to either a complete shutdown, or if you have a dog with a little bit more kind of gusto, it tends to lead to reactivity. So an aggressive display towards whatever trigger is putting them into that anxious state of mind in order to try and drive the trigger away. This is very common and it can be very hard to snap a dog out of. But this is where controlled and controlled use of pressure in a really considered manner, or even controlled use of punishment in a really well considered manner, is going to lead that dog back to you in a manner where you can continue on with training instead of shutting the session down. So let's bring it down to a human level. So say you've got a new job, right? Getting a new job is always a bit stressful. Even if you're good at the job, you're meeting new people, you're learning new computer systems, you're learning new routines, whatever it may be. All of this produces stress, but again, low levels of stress are important in order for learning to take place. Now, if in that new job you have a guide, right? For lack of a better word, you have a person that has been doing the job for a while and they've been assigned to help you through it. What's going to happen if they're a good teacher is they're slowly going to start introducing more and more workload. They're going to teach you more and more parts of whatever computer program you're using, and they're going to introduce you to other people that work there, and you begin to habituate to the job. You begin to neutralize to the job. So now it becomes familiar. Things that become familiar tend to stress us out less. Now, there is very often going to be an increase in workload. And for some people, it gets to a point where they become overwhelmed. So the example that I like to use is, imagine you walk into your job one day. Everything is seemingly normal. People are there. You say hi, you grab yourself a coffee, you walk into your office. But then suddenly on this day, your manager kicks down the door, slams a bunch of paper work to be done on your desk, a pile 4 times the high of what you would naturally do in a day. And it goes, we have to have this done by the end of the day. Now, what happens is cortisol spikes along with adrenaline in your body. You kind of puff yourself up because you go like, oh shit, the trigger in front of me is so overwhelming. I need essentially extra energy to get out of this situation. Now, at that point, what happens when we get super stressed is we become agitated, we become forgetful, we forget what we're doing, we forget how to do basic things because our mind is not focused in any way, form, or shape. We end up having reduced appetite, right? I know people, when I used to work in advertising, they would go 12-hour days without eating because they were so stressed. The only thing they could think about was how stressed they were, and that made them feel nauseous. Hence why they didn't eat, and hence why they drained out of energy pretty quickly. But also another thing that happens is you become fidgety. You have trouble settling. And we tend to see this in a lot of high arousal dogs that haven't been taught how to switch off their drive and their arousal properly. They end up just pacing back and forth around the house. They're drooling, they're just picking up random things, they're frantically running from the window to the door, barking at anything that moves, right? This dog's stuck in a state of over-arousal, and prolonged over-arousal very often leads to anxiety because the dog never gets to relax properly, they never get to settle down. Now, in the case of this fictitious human that I've made up, that get overwhelmed with the amount of work that they have to get done in a day, they start to panic and they start freak out and they go like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what's like, what do I do? What do I do? I need help. I need someone that's got to help me. And suddenly you end up not able to see the trees for the forest because everything's so overwhelming. Now, at that point, your brain starts getting frantic and it starts making poor decisions or even like seemingly out of character decisions. Now, if your teacher or guide at that point reaches out, grabs you by the arm, gives it a quick shake, and says your name in a loud voice, what happens is in most cases, you're going to redirect your attention to the immediate thing that's happening to you, which is the pressure that is applied to you, both physically and mentally, by him grabbing his arm and saying your name and yelling at you. Now, there is a split second there where your brain almost does like a fucking factory reset, like it goes, and then the Windows factory reset song comes on, and your brain boots up again. Again, when I say bro science, this is what I fucking mean. I don't actually know what happens in your head, but I know that this happens because it's happened to me many times in the past. Now, what happens now is your brain comes back online and you look at the person and that person starts giving you instruction. He goes, hey, look at this piece of paper here. This is a very quick and easy task. This will get you started so that we can begin chipping away at this. And boom, your brain begins operating on a whole different level where you can actually focus. You're still stressed, yes, but you can think through the stress. That is the big difference. And what brought you back from going into that panicky state was actual mild physical and mental discomfort. That's what opened your brain up for learning again and took away that immediate fight or flight response that you were getting trapped in. Now, another example can be having a big event at your house. I don't know, say it's, a big birthday party happening, you're turning 40 or you've had a kid, something is happening. Now, a lot of people are coming to your place for a celebration. That can be quite stressful, depending on how good you are at throwing a party. Now, I'm pretty fucking nonchalant when it comes to parties, so I just kind of get people to rock up and we have some drinks and we see what happens. But people who have a little bit more of a, hey, we need this to go well, we need to actually think about what we're doing, they can find this to be very stressful. And so you might be cooking for a bunch of people. You might be cooking a bunch of different things. You might have the barbecue going and the oven and potatoes in the air fryer, and it's all happening at the same time. Now, there are lots of people in groups chatting around you. There might be kids running and screaming. And suddenly you start to feel overwhelmed. You start to forget, oh shit, when did I put the potatoes in? Oh, the barbecue is smoking. Oh my God, I haven't had a chance to say hi to this person yet. Right. And all this spirals to a point where you can become a little bit frantic. Now, it's at this very point when you're not really paying attention and you're running around like a headless chicken. It's at this point in time that you put your hand on the hot stove and you burn your hand, not super bad, but enough for you to go, oh fuck, and pull away and step away from the stove. Again, same thing happens. Factory reset. Brain goes, droop. Windows factory reset sound comes back on. And suddenly you can think again. You can think because you've experienced pain and you go, well, I have one priority now, and that is patching my hand up before I continue on. Now, what you'll find is after that event, in the vast majority of cases, you don't go back to the level of frantic that you started experiencing to begin with, because that aversive experience has put the brakes on your brain a little bit. It has made you concentrate a little bit harder through all of the nonsense that's happening around you. And you're able to perform the task more successfully, you finish cooking, you finish serving people, whatever it is, you pick up the kids and you go and have a chat to the person that you missed in the beginning. This is what aversive control does to a lot of dogs. Now, I can't tell you how many times I've heard this said to me as a trainer, and it is, my dog's very food driven, but he won't take treats when we leave the house. Why is that? So, we know that low levels of eustress actually promotes learning. In order to learn something new, you have to experience a certain level of stress because that is what activates you into understanding, performing, resolving the puzzle, completing the task, whatever it may be. Some stress has to be involved in order for proper learning to take place. Now, if the eustress gets pushed too far, it goes into distress. And when we get into distress, now absolutely all learning stops taking place. It is completely inhibited because we get trapped in a fight or flight response. I have to get the fuck away from here. I have to fight this guy, whatever it is. No actual reasonable information goes in. No learning takes place at that point in time. And this is an everyday situation for so many dogs, dogs that have a low tolerance for stress in particular. Now, I've talked about this in the past, but like some of the main reasons why a dog would have a low tolerance for stress would be a lack of socialization. So, a puppy that hasn't been taken many places, hasn't learned that, the world is a diverse place and things look different, they sound different, and they haven't learned to habituate and neutralize to many different things. But it can also be poor genetics. It can be a dog that has had an incredibly bad experience. It has been, I don't know, attacked by another dog. Something bad has happened to them during a learning period, which has caused this lack of resilience towards a particular trigger. And so now what happens with a lot of these dogs, you'll see people always like to demonstrate to me. They go like, "Hey, look at what he can do in the house." They go sit, drop, shake, jump on the couch, whatever it may be. And they go, "Look, he can do all of this here. The second we walk through the door, he can't do any of them. It's like he can't hear me." And honestly, the in most cases, the dog can't actually physically hear you because he is trapped in this super heightened state of stress, and he is trapped in a fight or flight response. Let me okay, let me give you an example. So imagine you and I are now standing on a footpath somewhere in Melbourne. Um, there are trains, trams, trucks, buses, bikes, people going past us. This is just normal stuff, something that we wouldn't normally be very freaked out about. Now we're just standing there having a conversation. And for some bizarre reason, because I'm just an odd individual, I just happen to be carrying a bag with your absolute most favorite food in that situation. Let's just go with that. Don't overthink things. Overthinking, that's for frantic dogs, not for people who listen to dog training podcasts. But let's just say we're standing there having a good conversation. I just happen to be carrying your favorite food with me. Now, from across the road, suddenly some guy climbs the fence. He flicks himself over, he lands heavily in like a superhero boom type situation. He stands up and he looks at us. Now, when we notice this individual, we look back at him and we notice that he's wearing a fucking Jason Voorhees hockey mask and he's carrying a machete. Now, as this individual starts approaching us, I look at you and I go, "Hey, man, would you like some of your all-time most favorite food right now?" What's going to happen most likely at that point in time is you're going to look at me and you're going to say, "Fuck me, I have different priorities at this point in time. I need to get away from the psycho killer across the road." So you start panicking. You start going into a heightened state of arousal. You start getting flooded with cortisol, the stress hormone. You start getting flooded with adrenaline, and you're preparing to either fight your way out of the situation or to run away from the situation. Now, again, if I quickly at this point whack you on the shoulder, grab you by the arm, say your name loudly, for a split second, you're going to stop your escalation of stress in your head and you're going to turn to look at me. And at that point, if I say to you, hey, look, it's just a kid playing dress up. Now, suddenly, the factory reset happens. You turn around, you look at the thing, and you realize, oh, he wasn't 6 meters tall, which is what your brain originally interpreted in your state of panic. It is just a little kid running around waving a fucking plastic machete around because it just happened to be Halloween. Now you look back to me and you go like, actually, do you know what? I am a little bit hungry. Fuck me. I will take that favorite food of mine that you just happen to be carrying it around because you're a psychotic weirdo that should probably be locked up somewhere. But see, now we've opened the door to reinforcement back up again, and we've done it through the use of contingent punishment or pressure. I actually had another example for this, and I looked it up before to see if there was still a thing, and apparently it's not, but that's because professionals are involved. So when I was a little kid, um, and we started swimming lessons, obviously we learned how to swim, we learned how to float, we learned how to not to drown. But one of the other things that we learned in that process was what we should do if we found ourselves in a situation where someone was drowning and we went out to try and help them. Now, I presume a lot of people have heard the same thing because I have asked other people about it and they're like, yep, we all heard the same thing. But what we were told was you dive in the water, you swim towards them as quickly as you can. Now, a drowning person is in a complete state of panic and they are just flailing frantically. Their eyes are very often closed. They can't hear what you're saying because they're fearful of dying. Right? This is kind of a normal thing, I imagine, when you're about to die. Haven't tried that yet, so I'll get back to you if it happens. But now they are flailing. They're treading water. They're throwing their arms around. They're doing anything they can to stay above water. And then you come in and we get what we call the death grip. So if the person drowning manages to latch onto you, what they will do is they will naturally start to try and climb you to get up out of the water. And by climbing you, they're pushing you underwater. And so now you find yourself in a situation where you begin drowning as well. Not ideal when you're trying to save someone and be a fucking hero. But what were you told when you were a child in that situation? Well, I was told you swim up as quickly as you can. You come around the side of the person, ideally if you can, and you crack them in the face with your fist. Because that little reset, hopefully, it will be enough to snap them out of the panic and they can hear what you're saying now. Worst case scenario, if it's really bad, they will have a brief moment of unconsciousness after you hit them in the head. That opens you up to the ability to swim in behind them, grab them around the neck, and drag them ashore. Now, when I looked this up before, obviously there was a bunch of like superhero, oh, I'm a professional lifeguard. And we don't do that anymore. We just swim under them and pop up behind them. And like, if you're a fucking professional, that is probably a good option. For me, I'm a pretty strong swimmer. I don't think I could do that in the middle of the fucking ocean with someone who's drowning. So I would still go for the punch in the face routine, because that seems simpler and more straightforward to me. But yeah, that's that's probably a good place to leave it. I can't think of anything else off the top of my head, but you see now how extreme situations, and not even particularly extreme situations, but just intense situation, can very much drag you out of a state of mind where you are incapable of making clear decisions and progress forwards in any form of feasible way where learning is taking place along the way. That's what I'm trying to get at here. So when people say to you, my dog loves training inside, but he won't take treats outside, it's usually because the second the dog leaves your house, he's in a frantic, panicky state of mind already. All right. So I have talked about this in the past, and I am going to repeat it here because I think it is important to understand. And that is that any form of physical application of pressure to a dog or a person or any living, feeling, thinking being is always going to be more effective than positive reinforcement. So, experiencing some form of pressure in order to move you into a different behavior or situation is what we call negative reinforcement. Pressure activates you into a behavior, then the pressure is taken away. Now, positive punishment is on the flip side of that, is usually high levels of pressure for a very short and intense period of time in order to stop you from doing something. Now, those two, negative reinforcement and positive punishment, is always going to be more effective than positive reinforcement. Because at the end of the day, as you saw in the example with the little kid playing dress up, when you hit that frantic, panicky state, the only I can offer you whatever. I can offer you wine, cocaine, anything that you love, even if it's highly addictive. But your main focus is always going to be on how do I stay safe. And so, in that point, a way that I bring you back into a learning state of mind is I apply physical pressure to you. Now, I'm not even going to get stuck into the people, the force retards, when they talk about the dog should always be on the threshold, blah, blah, blah. That's not training for real life. These training methodologies where they go like, oh, the dog can never be stressed because the learning is going to stop taking place, blah, blah, blah. Sure, that works probably okay in a fucking laboratory setting. It does not work in the real world. Now, I train in the real world every single fucking day, which is why I need to use everything available to me in order to help the dog find the clarity and get the progression that I need. So we're putting that aside for now. But very often, especially when we're dealing with reactive dogs, what we do find is that the dog has learned to fight the pressure. So, say you have a reactive dog that has some issues with other dogs for whatever reason. Maybe it's a socialization issue, maybe it's a bad experience issue, maybe it's genetic, who knows. Again, I should probably mention right here that genetics we can't really do anything about with training. So there's always going to be a level of management. However, if it's a learning experience or just a low tolerance for stress, then we can absolutely work through a lot of that with proper considered behavior modification. Now, what happens is me and this dog are out going for a walk, just a regular sniffing exercise walk. And in the distance, the dog that I'm walking or working with sees another dog and they start to wind themselves up. They start to, as we call it, loading. They begin a loading process. Basically, loading means you begin building stress, releasing more cortisol, releasing more adrenaline, or in the case of a dog that is very over aroused, maybe over socialized, you're releasing, fuck, I'm going to get this wrong, but I think you're releasing dopamine, which is a seeking. Uh, Fuck, I can't remember what it's called now, but it's pushing the dopamine, which is a seeking material into your brain. I know that's not the right word, but I can't think of the actual word now, and I don't want to stop because I feel like I have to keep the conversation going at this point, so I remember everything. But now, what happens is the dog begins the loading process. They amp themselves up more and more, more and more adrenaline comes into the body. The dog is preparing more and more for a fight or flight response. Then the other dog or trigger gets too close, the explosion happens. And a lot of, well, pretty much all the force free trainers that I've ever listened to have then said that means that the training session's over because there is no coming back from that when the dog has reacted. That is completely false in, I would say, 99.9% of cases. Because in that moment, sure, in that exact moment, no actual helpful learning is going to take place. But that doesn't mean the training session's over. Because if I implement a heavy bout of pressure or punishment in that very moment, 99.9% of dogs will stop the behavior that they're doing. The factory reset will begin. The dog's brain will power down and power back up again, and they will start to look around and go, what the fuck just happened? That has never happened before. Now, what you need to understand is a reactive dog that is pulling on the leash is learning to actively fight pressure. They hit the end of the leash, pressure is applied to their neck or the harness, whatever they're wearing at the time, and they become more and more frantic. That increase in adrenaline in their body makes them fight against the pressure even harder. They become better at withstanding pain, and everything escalates. So at that point, the dog is negatively reinforcing themselves into the behavior. They go, the harder I go, the quicker I can overcome this pressure. The more pressure I can overcome, the bigger the explosion becomes. So at that point, you could hold a fucking T-bone steak out in front of that dog, and they're going to push it aside and they're going to go, no, fuck you, I have to kill this guy over here because he's my problem. And the idea that he presents, the fear that he triggers in me, or the excitement that he triggers in me is more important than any fucking food you can put in front of my face. Now, with some dogs, you can redirect them into toys, but at the same time, redirecting isn't really dealing with the problem. It is just temporarily confusing the dog into doing something else. Right? If you want to actually deal with the problem, you have to get into the thick of it at some point, and you have to start giving the dog feedback, both aversive and appetitive. Both good and bad. They all have to play into this. If not, progression will never happen. Or if it does happen, it's going to happen in such tiny little increments that you're barely going to see any progression. And very quickly, it's going to hit a ceiling where the dog goes, okay, cool, I'm 2% better now. That's all that I can give you under these circumstances. And that's where people become management for life. That's when you have reactive dog owners running behind cars to hide so that the dog won't see the other dog, won't react, blah, blah, blah. That's not dog training. That is just avoidance of the actual problem. And no, it doesn't get better over time. All right, so your reactive dog has learned to pull on the leash when it sees a trigger. That pressure activates the dog further into the behavior, intensifying the behavior. The dog lunges, barks, goes crazy. The trigger moves away. The dog gets reinforced through heavy bouts of negative reinforcement. So he's like, I pulled really hard on the leash. That was uncomfortable. But then I barked even louder and the other thing went away. And now I feel safe again. All of this is negative reinforcement into exacerbating the reactivity. Now, we have something that we call a prediction error. And a prediction error is as simple as it sounds. It is a predicted outcome. There's a discrepancy between a dog's expected outcome and the actual experience received. So, dog is pulling on the leash. When it sees another dog, it starts lunging, it starts barking. The predictability or the prediction in the dog's mind is I'm going to feel tension around my neck. That's going to be uncomfortable. But the louder I bark, the more I fucking spin on the leash, the more I snap my teeth, the quicker the other dog's going to go away. Now, what we can do in this moment is we can install a prediction error into the dog to show them this isn't going to work anymore. This is not the path to success. The only reason why a dog ever conducts a behavior repeatedly is because they found success and they found reinforcement in the behavior. If we can block access to that reinforcer, we can create a prediction error that makes the dog rethink the situation that they're in. So, if you have a dog that has learned over time to be operantly aggressive, or reactive, whatever word you want to use. What happens now is the dog sees a trigger And through classical conditioning and operant conditioning, it is learned if I blow up at that thing will go away. I will start to feel safe again. Feeling safe is more important than any treat my mum can put in front of me. And the cycle continues endlessly. However, if that dog in that situation is met with a high bout of novel pressure or punishment, is we interrupt the behavior and immediately the brain factory reset begins. So this is why very often I will change tools on a dog when I'm working with them. So if the dog's been walking on a thick flat collar, right, for a long period of time, they've learned to pull on that. Well, if I change the tool into something like a slip lead, like I can't use prom collars here because I live in the nanny state of Victoria and every politician here should be driven off a bridge and the whole thing should be restarted. But if I put something like a slip lead on the dog, suddenly the sensation of pulling on a slip lead is very different and more aversive than pulling on a flat collar. And so now there's a prediction error because the dog goes, fuck, I've never experienced this before. And they stop thinking about the trigger that's happening in front of them and they start thinking about the tool around their neck. Now, at that point, there is a split second of an opening where you can go, Fido, come to me and I'll show you that I will keep you safe and I will reward you in the process as well. Whether you want treats or pats or fucking play, it doesn't really matter. But we've cracked that dog's predicted brain or thought pattern open and we've inserted a little bit of a virus. Now think of, I can't remember who said it. I think it was Pat Stewart from the Canine Paradigm, but he talks about these behaviors when they're rehearsed for long enough, they almost become like a computer program. So you type the computer program, you press execute, and the cycle plays, right? The dog sees a trigger, lunges, barks at the trigger goes away. The computer program is complete. Now, what we need to do is we need to insert a virus into that coding and we have to start breaking it apart because that's the only way we can teach a dog, hey, actually, this is not the behavior that I want to see from you, but I'll show you what to do instead. Right? You cannot train a behavior with positive reinforcement in a frantic dog in a state of mind. Now, you can take some time to train that behavior before you start putting the dog in a stressful environment. Absolutely. And I encourage that. But a lot of dogs that I meet for the first time, we don't have that luxury. So we have to go out and we have to go like, okay, we're going to draw a line in the sand. That line is going to be very important for the dog to understand, but that is also what's going to open us up for changing the dog's life. That prediction error, that sensation of going, hey, I'm going to blow up at this dog and try and put teeth on him, but that is met with discomfort or pain rather than the release of the trigger going away. Suddenly, the dog goes, fuck me, everything's changed. I need to start paying attention. Discomfort and even what we call pain compliance creates intense urgency and focus because the dog goes, I have to work out very quickly what is happening. I have to work out a way of stopping it and I have to concentrate on where it's coming from rather than all the crap that's happening around me. Now, that does not mean that the discomfort is prolonged in any way, form, or shape. In most cases, you want it to be very short, fast, intense, and snappy. Right? Instead of dragging someone by the arm where the person is trying to get away from you and pulling the opposite direction, you want to just quickly slap them in the face and go like, hey, open up that beautiful gray thinking thing up in your head. By the way, someone's going to make a clip out of this and laugh at me. I know the brain is pink. Just, yes, feel free to laugh at me. That's okay. but that discomfort, that physical discomfort interrupts everything that's happening and creates an intense urgency and focus where you go, I have to solve this puzzle immediately because there are consequences and those consequences are intense enough for me to want to control them. Now, thinking pattern is broken. And suddenly, when you break that thinking pattern, the dog starts experiencing the world around them again instead of just intensely focusing on the one trigger that has always been their problem. Suddenly, the dog looks at you and goes, "What the fuck just happened?" And you just give them a second or two to kind of sit with it. And then I will offer them a toy. I will offer them a handful of food. And guess what? In the vast majority of cases, unless it's a completely shut down, broken dog, they will take the food. They will take the toy. They will accept the pat. They will wag their tail when you tell them good dog. Why? Because that hyperfixation on the state of arousal or the anxiety that was happening in the dog's mind has now been interrupted. That punishment, that discomfort, that negative reinforcement is what opened the door for the dog to walk through to come back into positive reinforcement. That's what this is all about. The punishment itself made the dog go, fuck me, reinforcement is available. Didn't even know that was an option because I was too focused on everything else. All right. Hopefully, this has kind of opened your thinking a little bit to when it comes to dealing with reactivity and those, hopeless cases. Now, I'm saying hopeless cases in air quotes because I have met very, very, very few what I would call hopeless cases. They do exist. There are dogs that are so far gone, so genetically poorly put together, so incorrectly socialized, or they've had such an incredibly painful racing that like you don't even know where to start, how to start bringing them back. It does happen, but that is the absolute minority. Dogs that I've met that have been fucking trained, and again, quotation marks for trained there, but they have had food thrown around them for years on end. They've been medicated to the hilt. They have 3, 4 anti-anxiety medications going at the same time. Most of these dogs just fucking need to be told, no, we're not doing this anymore. That's it. That is their pathway out of medication. That is their pathway into a more relaxed, stress-free, and happy life, both for dog and owner, right? Anyone, who keeps throwing out this idea that any form of pressure or punishment makes a dog fearful, aggressive, shut down, punishment always has fallout. They don't know what they're doing. That's why they can't make progress. And that is why it's so important that we are able to keep dog training tools, that we don't demonize punishment, because punishment, in most cases, opens the door to reinforcement for that dog that everyone said was a lost cause and should be put down. I have saved many, many a dog that have been essentially on death row. People have contacted me and they've said, like, either you fix this dog or we kill him, because that's what the previous 5 trainers have told them. And in most of those cases, 1 or 2 heavy punishments is what turned the dog around and saved its life. All right. To finish up, I'm going to tell you a story. I like telling stories, as you may have noticed by now, but this one goes out to my good friend and also now fellow trainer Tess and her boy George. I love saying boy George. So I snuck that in there. George is awesome. So George is how old's George now? 6 years old, I think. He's a Great Dane. He's huge and he is the most loving little thing. But when I met him, I think roughly 3 years ago, he was extremely dog reactive. Now, it's also worth keeping in mind that Tess is a very small lady. and George weighs about 10 kilos more than her. So whenever he blew up at any dog that he would see at pretty much any distance, she was pretty much just holding on for life. And this is not an uncommon story. It's a story I hear frequently. Um, and again, at this point, this is where we have to step in and we have to make changes quickly. We have to find the right tool that works for the owner and the dog. And yeah, we need to draw that line in the sand and we have to go like, mate, this just isn't going to fly anymore because this will get you killed. So when I met Tez, we started introducing him to first a slip lead, then an electric collar. And we started working with these two tools. We did some conditioning. We gave him a good understanding of how they work. We taught him how to loose lead walk. He already had a pretty good loose lead walk, but again, if he saw a dog in any distance at all, he would just arc up on two legs. And this guy's as tall as me when he's on two legs, if not taller. And I'm 2 meters tall. Like, just keep that in mind. He's huge. But yeah, we started introducing these tools. He started getting it. And or another one thing that I forgot to say about George, he had never ever taken food outside of the house. He wasn't a big eater. He's not really a big eater to begin with. He's quite he kind of like this is probably one of the few cases where I've seen someone leave food out for the dog all day, every day, and you're like, yeah, that's a good thing because he barely eats despite his 65 kilos or however much he weighs now. But yeah, he'd never taken food outside. You could bring a whole roast chicken with you. And even if there were no triggers around, even if it was just him and her standing in like a quiet parking area, he would still not take food because he was too hyper vigilant all the time. So we spent some time conditioning the tools. He started walking super nicely. And we started taking him out into increasingly stressful environments. And, the only reward we had at the time was just saying good boy and patting him. That was it. Because he loves being touched. He loves being roughhoused with a little bit. So that was kind of like all we could do, just pat him on the neck and go like, good boy. Now, what happened is we are walking down the street and again, he has been introduced to the electric collar at low levels at this point, but he's never felt a high stimulation. Now, what happens is like I say, in the distance, but we're talking like maybe 10 meters ahead of us, a dog comes out of the park on the leash with his owner. And George saw the dog and essentially just lunged forward immediately. Now, the second he lunged forwards, I stimmed him on the electric collar at a pretty decent level. Right off the top of my head, I think it was like a 60 or a 70 out of 100. Up until then, he's never experienced anything more than a 15. So 15 to 60, 70, that is a massive jump. And that is creating what we call pain compliance, right? We're introducing pain in order to get the dog to go, wow, I really want that to never happen again. Here's exactly what transpired in the next minute after that happened. Dog lunches, stimulation comes on. George immediately takes a step back and closes his mouth. And he looks from left to right. He looks at me. He looks at Tess, his owner. He looks at the dog. He looks at me again. And he's just going, what the fuck just happened? I have no idea what just happened. But what was happening in that moment is he was taking in the world around him. He was actually looking at the dog. He was looking at us. He was acknowledging the fact that we existed in his still stressed mind. But the stress had been pushed down enough for him to go like, oh, wow, I can hear myself think, essentially. Next thing that happened is I present him with a handful of food. And for the first time in his life at 3 or 4 years old, I can't remember exactly how old he was, he eats outside of the house. Why? because he got a slap in the face. He got told, hey, don't fucking do that. Right? Make better decisions. Think about what you're doing instead of just doing them. And George goes, fuck me. I didn't even know that was an option. For the rest of the walk, we walked past another 5, 6, 7 dogs, I think. He did not react once. He did not lunge once. He did not bark once. He looked at the dog. He looked away. He got a handful of food. Then he ate even in the presence of the trigger. Now, this isn't a one-off incident. This is something I do every single week. And again, I cannot explain to you exactly what happens in the dog's mind, the neurotransmitters that are active, or the things that the brain get flooded with. I can't tell you all of that because I don't know. I would love to know more about it. But what I can tell you is I've seen it work with my own eyes hundreds and hundreds of times. Punishment opens the door to reinforcement. Again, broad science, can't really explain it, but I can tell you it works. Now, I have to finish this up by saying, obviously, don't just buy an electric collar, slap it on your dog, go for a walk and see what happens. That is not how this works, right? Work with someone who knows what they're doing, who are experienced in using these tools, and who is a good balance trainer, not just a yank and cranker and not just a throw food and hope for the bestie, right? Have someone who actually understands how to drive behavior, how to create clear consequences, how to be fair, how to be fair, and how to be clear. Because without those things, these tools, they don't help. They just confuse even further, right? So you have to work with someone who actually knows what they're doing. But yeah, that's my story of Tess and George. And again, I had a job on the weekend. Same thing happened, but we just gave one big correction with the slip lead. And the dog went, oh, you don't want me to try and bite every person that walks past. And they went, what do you want me to do instead? Boom. Dog's open for positive reinforcement. Now we can start teaching them, even under a little bit of stress in a highly distracting environment. If you're listening to this, please know that there is hope. There is hope for almost all dogs. Again, I have met some dogs that I wouldn't even know where to start with them. It does happen, but it is such a vast minority. In most cases, it doesn't even compute. I think I've seen 3 dogs in the last decade that I do not know how to help this dog because they're so far gone. That is absolutely not the norm. Get help, get your dog on the right track, find a better, easier, better life, more stress-free, everyone's happier. It can be done. Trust me, take my word for it. All right. I think that's all from me. Looking at my notes to see if I've forgotten anything, but I don't think I have. So if you're still with me, sorry for not putting this podcast out last week. Things have been bloody hectic the last few weeks, and I feel like I'm just swimming to try and, I'm the drowning victim at the moment. I'm just trying to kind of like flail my way to the top and stay on top. But lots more good stuff coming. Thank you so much for listening. As always, jump on, drop us a comment, drop us a 5-star review. That's always very much appreciated. And as you probably know by now, go train your dogs. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Beastly Talks. I hope you found it interesting and that you'll join me for the next one as well. If you like this podcast, please take a moment to rate and review it so that more people can hear about it. Or if you think this particular episode would benefit a family member, friend or colleague, be sure to share it with them directly. You can follow me on social media at Viking Dog Trainer on Facebook, Instagram and YouTube. Thank you for your support and keep training your dog.